Hello, my sober lovelies. Before we dive in, I'm really excited to announce my group coaching program for women is live, and you can join now. So excited for this because let's be real here. Quitting drinking isn't just about saying no to the glass of wine or booze. It's about what comes after. All the fear, the boredom, the late night anxiety, and the stories you've been telling yourself for years. And that's where my Rewired Sober group coaching program for women comes in. It's only $247. I'm being totally transparent on the price. It's for 3 months, and you'll learn how to shift your mindset, build habits that actually stick, and question the core beliefs that have been keeping you stuck, and find healthier ways to deal with that loneliness and that now what feeling. The best part is you don't have to do it alone. We'll have live group coaching sessions weekly, and there'll be a bunch of women walking through it with you. It's not another cookie cutter sobriety program for mommy vloggers. It's neuroscience meets real life, and it's designed for women to help you not just stay sober, but actually feel good living sober. You can join anytime, and I'd love to see you on the inside. So start today, get instant access. The link's in the show notes. Welcome to Rewired Sober, the podcast where we unpack what it really takes to rewire your brain after alcohol. Hi, I'm your host, Kate Vitella, a registered nurse, board certified in mental health and addiction, sober since 2018, and a coach who blends neuroscience, lived experience, and real talk to help women break the shame spiral and rebuild their thinking with tools like journaling, humor, and honest conversation. This isn't surface level sobriety. This is where the healing gets deep, grounded, and unapologetically honest. So let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Rewired Sober. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest and really unpack the ways that alcohol becomes like a socially acceptable way at the end of the day to unmask and drink, after our public-facing persona, after we can take off that mask and be who we are. And, as a career nurse, I am so used to being this public-facing example and then going home and being, my real self. And so I brought on today someone who's been in the teaching profession for a very long time because I found so much similarities in her work as a teacher and my work as a nurse, and plus she's just an awesome lady. So I'm going to be introducing today, welcome to the pod, Jennifer Mathieu is the critically acclaimed author of 7 novels for young adults, including Moxie, which is now a major motion picture directed by Amy Poehler on Netflix. Her first novel for adults, The Faculty Lounge, is published by Dutton Penguin Random House. Her books have been translated into over 20 languages. A former journalist, Mathieu is a graduate of Northwestern and has been a teacher for 20 years. She lives with her family in Houston. And she's sober.
Yes,
Obviously.
I am.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you for that lovely introduction, and I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And I was, batting it in my head, different ways to kind of cue this episode up. And what kept coming back for me is that teachers are in such a public facing role.
Mhm.
And, the students, you're on all day long, right? In
Yep,
front of a
yep.
classroom. And the students have no idea what your life is or who you really are or what you do after school. Well, hopefully they have no idea, right?
Exactly, yes. Hopefully not. In a way, they shouldn't know.
Yeah, and that's so similar to the experiences I've had as a nurse, where I'm Nurse Kate in front of the family,
Mhm.
and so I wanted to start out by having you tell us a little bit about your story I mean, this is obviously a podcast about sobriety. So, how did you get sober? How did you come to sobriety?
Yeah, so it's such a delight to be here, Kate, and I'm so happy to be able to share my story with your listeners and with you. So I got sober on March 6th, 2021. I had been sober curious for probably about 10 years prior to. And when I say sober curious, that might be a more positive way of describing what I was going through. I think I was going through a period of real anxiety about my drinking and worrying about my drinking for about 10 years up until I quit. And I was 44 when I quit. I was doing the classic Googling in the middle of the night, do I have a problem with alcohol? I was doing let me try to, I would white knuckle, a dry January to prove to myself that I could do it. I knew in my core, in my soul, in my heart that I had a problematic relationship with alcohol that had really started in my early to mid 30s and really ramped up. I mean, I drank problematically as a young person. Um, Probably in a way that a lot of young people do. And then it sort of settled, and then it kind of reared its ugly head after I became a mom because I was momming it and I was a teacher and I was a writer and a wife and 100 other million things. And my self care, and I put that in quotes because it's not real self care, but my self care became drinking every night, basically, to tune out and to try to numb out all the demands of my life. And of course, in 2020, the pandemic hit and that just escalated. And not only was my drinking escalating, it felt like the universe was telling me that it was totally okay that it was escalating. Everywhere I looked during the pandemic, there were just messages, social media, everything, just of all the times to not worry about your drinking, now is the time, just drink it all away. And I was drinking heavily, heavily in the first year of the pandemic, trying to cope with so much of the stress that we were all living through. Um, and it's a funny thing. It actually, by just the moment I got sober, coincided with the movie Moxie, which a lot of people know me for. That's the one book a lot of people know me for. The movie version had come out um, in March of 2021. And I was supposed to go to an outdoor, because we were like about a year into the pandemic. So people were still kind of being careful. And some of my friends had very kindly offered to host a watch party outside. They like hung a big sheet and, we were going to watch the movie in their backyard. And I had gotten really drunk the night before in my house. And the day we were going to go on March 5th, we were going to go to this event. And I told my husband, um, I had too much to drink last night. I don't want to drink tonight. And he said, okay. And literally within 30 seconds of walking into that backyard, I was drinking champagne. And I didn't embarrass myself. Nothing bad happened, if I'm going to be really honest. Nothing, I actually had a fun time. I did get drunk. But I didn't do anything to embarrass myself or anything. There wasn't anything like that. And I've had some dark moments drinking, but not on that night. But I woke up the next morning on the morning of March 6th, and I remember being so angry at myself because I had not been able to keep that promise to my husband. And for the first time, I was more curious than afraid of the idea of getting sober. I don't know what it was. The switch flipped, and I'm so grateful that it did. But there was part of me that was more curious than afraid. And because up until this point, the idea of quitting drinking, it was like trying to picture infinity. I just couldn't imagine it. How could anybody ever quit drinking? And that morning, I just remember thinking, maybe there's something kind of cool going on there. Maybe there's something exciting if I choose this path. And I texted the one person I knew. I knew a couple sober people, but this was the one like woman that I would consider a close like girlfriend. I texted her and I said, "Are you still not drinking?" And she texted back, "Yeah, and I'm super happy and I love it." And I texted her back, "I think I'm done." And within about a week, I joined a sober mom group. I started following all these sober Instagram accounts. I started listening to all these sober podcasts. I just immersed myself in sobriety. And I'm so grateful for that day. I'm so grateful for the switch flipping. So that's kind of my story in a little bit of a nutshell.
So interesting. You kind of framed it up as a problematic relationship with alcohol. I think that's
Yeah.
such a good way to describe it without labeling what it is or, just looking at overall the relationship was problematic. Like the net result was not good, right?
Right,
No
right,
matter
right.
how you splice it. And really fascinating that you came to a moment where you were more curious than afraid. Because
Mhm.
I constantly tell my coaching group in Rewired Sober, like, stay curious, stay curious. And,
Yeah.
you know, curiosity is different than fear. And this is the difference here. And what do you think helped you make that shift?
Well, I think in part it was the negative consequences of my drinking beginning to catch up with me. So there was a little bit of the, if you think of the carrot or the stick, I mean, I definitely think part of it was the stick element of it. I was drinking heavily almost every night. And as I entered my 40s, my body couldn't do it anymore. I mean, I was waking up and I thought I was in menopause earlier than I actually was. I mean, I wasn't in menopause yet, I now know. I was waking up covered in sweat in the middle of the night, hangxiety, as they call it. I was constantly thinking about, do we have enough alcohol in the house? Constantly making sure that we had enough. Um, Doing things like drinking before my husband got home from work and then kind of like rinsing out the glass and brushing my teeth and then pouring myself a drink and making him think that that was my first one and feeling really ashamed of that kind of behavior. Um, just really like sneaky, uncomfortable, yucky stuff that was beginning to catch up with me. And I didn't like how it made me feel. I tell this story. I used to do this thing where when I would wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety, I would email myself an email, and in the subject line, I would put NA, which stood for no alcohol. And then because I often use email or text to like remind me, like buy toilet paper or whatever, right? And then when I see it in my inbox, it'll help me remember for the day. And so I would send myself this email, NA. And then my hope was that the whole next day I would see this in my email inbox and it would be a reminder not to drink that day. And I remember when I got sober, I did a search for that subject line and I was like horrified because it was just pages and pages of, and of course, half of the time I failed. I would say I wasn't going to drink the next day. And of course I would. Um, and so part of it, I think me getting curious was because I was so sick and tired of feeling so gross. And the physical consequences and the emotional consequences were starting to catch up with me. But then honestly, the curiosity part came from all these wonderful sober influencers and sober women that I was finding. I mean, social media can be really gross, and I hate it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But I would say in this capacity, it ended up being a real lifesaver because I was seeing all these cool women, including the one woman I knew that was sober too in real life, but they were all living these really cool and amazing and interesting lives. And they were talking about how amazing their lives were without alcohol. And I was like, well, like, what do they know that I don't know? And I could tell that they were sincere in what they were talking about. And so I think that honestly helped flip the switch for me too. Was just the idea that, you know, well, if there are these cool, awesome women that are living these cool, awesome lives sober, well, maybe I can too, So I think it was a little bit of the carrot and the stick that got me
Yeah.
to feel curious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they say it's hard to become what you don't see, and
Right.
so you now are exposed to sober social media, for better or worse,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
see that there are truly other women out there living fully creative and wonderful, enriched lives without
Yeah.
booze.
Yeah, and like, I think one of the things that I ran into, and I always preface this by saying, like, I stand in total solidarity with anyone who's sober in recovery, whatever, wherever it took you. And one of my first sober friends was a colleague of mine, a male colleague who got sober in AA. And like, he was like, yeah, there was a point where I was like sleeping under a bridge, right? Like the classic story. And he was a wonderful support when I was first getting sober. But I do think that one of the things that kind of held me back was this idea in my head that I had that of what a person in recovery looked like. Like you did have to sleep under a bridge, or you did have to like be drinking out of the paper bag on the park bench. And, by all appearances, I was an incredibly successful person. No one would have ever guessed that I had this problematic relationship with alcohol, really. I mean, my husband probably, I think, started to have concerns, but a lot of people wouldn't have known looking at me because I was so buttoned up and successful in these really obvious ways. And so, not seeing or not having visible for me like the stories of women who were also sort of type A overachiever types that were, rose all day, numbing out with alcohol at night in secret. Like, without seeing those stories, I think it took me longer to get sober because the only image that I had in my mind was the person under the bridge, you know? And
Yeah.
so I'm really grateful for all the women, particularly the moms who were so vocal and are so vocal. And that's why I'm, Recover Out Loud, because I want other women and moms to know that they can get sober too. They don't have to have some, you know, leaving Las Vegas rock bottom, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Sober social media completely changed the game because suddenly we're able to see people like us that didn't
Yeah.
live under a bridge, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, even though I had a pretty significant rock bottom, I also had my shit together,
Mhm,
you
mhm.
know?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I
So
mean,
I get that.
my book became a movie on Netflix.
I was gonna say, like,
I was at my net the last time I drank was at a Netflix movie watching party, right? I mean, the height of success, right? And,
yes. Yeah, so you are at the height of your success. Were you drinking when you wrote that? I mean, not to like call you out.
no, 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 you can ask. Actually, funny enough, and I always share this, um, I've shared this in meetings. When I wrote, I rarely drank. And I think that's a really curious thing. There's all these sort of, stereotypes about the drunk writer and
Yeah, yeah.
and there's a, write drunk, edit sober. Like there's all kinds of jokes about that. But in all honesty, I'm not going to say I never drank while I wrote. Maybe I had a drink next to me while I was writing, but I never wrote like intoxicated. And I think what's interesting about that is that writing was and is a natural dopamine rush for me. It's a natural high. And so it is real self-care for me to be creative. And so I think that's why I never felt like I had to alter myself to write, and why writing in sobriety has been still an important outlet for me. So I don't know, I find that kinda interesting when I think back on that is, that I didn't write drunk, I did other things drunk, but I never wrote drunk, and I think that that's a real telling thing.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. When you say, you didn't have to numb out while you were writing, because that was such a creative dopamine rush for you, what were you feeling like you needed to numb out at the end of the day? If you could put words to it.
Mhm, mhm. Well, what I would say, now I'll have 5 years of sobriety this in March of 2026. So, I have some time. I still think I'm a baby in sobriety. I still feel like, I don't know. I think I need to get to 5 years before I can even say I'm a veteran in this. But looking back, what I think I've learned about myself is that the main reason that I was trying to numb out all the time and to sort of shut it down is that I had incredibly poor boundaries when it came to taking real care of myself. I was the kind of person that, there's that saying, you want something done, ask a busy person. And that was me. Um, People were constantly asking me to help with stuff at, the PTA, my church, my son's school. And honestly, a lot of the times they didn't even have to ask. I would volunteer myself because I believed that I had to do everything and be everything for everybody. And I often times overscheduled myself, overcommitted myself. I have a memory of sitting in a faculty meeting once and I'm still old school with my paper calendars, and I had the whole month open. Like I have a month calendar so you can see the whole month at once. And I was sitting next to this colleague of mine and I had my calendar open and she looked at it and she went, "Whoa." And she was saying that because my calendar looked insane. It was just full of stuff. I was every square. There wasn't a single empty square. And a lot of the stuff that I was saying yes to, I didn't want to say yes to. I didn't want to, do this particular. And I got, I would get asked as an author, I would get asked as a teacher, I would get asked as a mother, and I would say probably half, if not more, of the stuff that I had down on that calendar, I was doing out of a total sense of obligation, and it would create resentment.
Yeah.
And then I needed an outlet for that, and the only outlet that I could come up with was to numb out and to drink. I remember that, and I've shared this on meetings too. Um, my husband, who actually can really relax, he actually knows how to authentically relax. He would be sitting in the den at the end of the day, listening to music or watching a movie or whatever, like genuinely relaxing. He's not a big drinker himself, and he would just be sitting in there relaxing. And I would go into the den with my laptop and my planner, that calendar that I just mentioned, and my stacks of papers and to do stuff. And I would sit there with my laptop on my lap and all my stuff and a drink to my right that I was constantly refreshing. I used to call it refreshing. That just means pouring myself another drink. And I would think that I was relaxing because I was sitting in the same room with my husband who was actually relaxing, but I was answering emails. I was making to-do lists. I was trying to finish things. And, um, and so one of the biggest things I've learned in sobriety is how to, and, as a caregiver in a caregiving profession, teaching you as well as a nurse, I think that certain personalities are drawn to these professions, these personality types that, I have a tendency to get codependent. I have a tendency to want to put everybody else's needs before my own. And in sobriety, I have learned like, actually, no, it's not selfish to put your needs first. It's not selfish to say no. It's not. In fact, and I remember, I think it was you, Kate, that said it, people pleasing is perfection is fear in a pretty dress. I was afraid to let people down. I was afraid that people wouldn't like me, all this other nonsense. And in sobriety, I have learned like, I'm going to say no to that. I'm not going to explain why. Like, I'm so sorry. I can't help with that. I just sent an email right before we got on here. Somebody at my church asked if I could help with something. And I sent a quick email. I said, I'm so sorry. I can't help with that. This is a really busy month. Best of luck. And I didn't even feel guilty about it.
Mhm.
That did not happen overnight. That did not happen right away. But over the course of almost 5 years, it is now my default. I really stop and think, do I really want to do this? And by saying no more often, by drawing better boundaries, by having more empty squares on the calendar, I am so much happier, so much happier. And sobriety is the cause of all of it, really. Because
Yeah.
once you remove the reason, like once I could no longer drink to numb out, I had to deal with what was making me want to numb out, you know?
Yes, absolutely. That's how it is. Immediately you remove the substance and you're left with the
Mm.
feeling you were trying to numb, right? And
Yeah.
I love that what you shared, breaking a promise to your husband, not breaking a promise to yourself, which you had
Hmm.
done a million times.
Right.
It was someone else. You broke a promise to someone else,
Hmm.
and that
Hmm.
kind of tipped you over the edge, and you fall into this cycle. I see so many women, like so many of my clients, it's like martyrdom, then resentment. You know,
Yes.
because you've overperformed, you've overdone, you're exhausted, you're people
Mhm.
pleased, you busted your ass, and that resentment, and then you feel entitled, and then you
Yes,
numb
yes,
out a little bit.
yes.
Plus, it's justified because you fucking hate your family anyway. Maybe not like that. Okay.
No, I know what you mean though, but like,
You're
yeah,
much more eloquent.
right, but you do start to feel, and like there were things that I was doing that my husband and son weren't even aware that I was doing because I
Yeah.
had never even, I hadn't told them I was doing it. I was managing things in the background. How are they to know, right? Um, and I operated from this mindset that everything was on my shoulders and that if I didn't do it, then no one else would. And it's a terrible mindset to have. And it sets you up to be super codependent. And, it just is something that I think too, honestly, Kate, was just getting tired. I was in my early 40s and I could see the rest of my life stretching out in front of me. And I just remember thinking, like, this isn't how I want to do the rest of my life. And I honestly think that's why so many women get sober in midlife, because
Midlife.
it's this inflection point where you're like, wait just a minute here. Like, if I am lucky, still have some time on the clock, but I don't have all the time, right? I'm halfway through, right? How do I want the second half of this game to go? And I didn't want it to be, for I have so much to be grateful for. When I look back on my life before I quit drinking, of course, I had so many joys and I had so many, it's not like it was all awful. It wasn't. It was many wonderful things. But there was this underlying theme that was getting worse, really. That was getting worse with age. And I just didn't want to keep doing it. And I cannot tell you how remarkable it is to make some of these connections at this stage in life. Because, you reach a point. I remember getting on some of these, the sober mom meetings in the beginning. And, this was in the first few weeks. And I had been in therapy on and off since I was like 19 for anxiety and other things. And I remember I would hear these women with some time under their belt saying things like, "Oh, I'm feeling better at this and I'm doing better at this." And I'll be honest with you, part of me kind of rolled my eyes because I was like, what are they talking about? I've been in therapy since I was 19. Like, I just need help to stop drinking. I don't really need any of this inner work stuff. Like, I've already done all that, right? I really had that thought, and I don't wanna discount the work that I did when I was young and in therapy. I think it was very valuable. But what I always say is by getting sober, it was like a power boost. It was like a leveling up of all of this work that I had done. Suddenly, some of this inner work was really sticking and was really happening as opposed to me just kinda talking about it all the time, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like when you read a book at one point in your life you're not really ready for and none of it makes any sense.
Yeah.
And then, you know,
Yes.
I recently reread a book I tried to read 4 years ago and I was like, "Oh my god, this author's talking to me." Like,
Yeah.
it's just about your own level of readiness and awareness and,
Right.
you know,
Right.
sobriety peels back so many layers that
It does.
it's fascinating to me that people will go to therapy for years and years and years and work on personal development. They'll do all the things. They'll go to the yoga retreats, they'll meditate, they'll,
Mm.
juice, they'll go running
Mhm.
and lots of Reiki therapy, all the things, but yet they don't get sober,
Yeah.
and then we finally do that last thing and it's like, oh, all the pieces come together.
Well, and it's just so like something, of course, and this happens, I think, when people get sober and you start looking at the world through a new lens, but you just start looking and you see how normalized it is in our culture to just numb out with booze and it's legal, right? So, I actually asked my students, we were reading an article or reading a book rather, a work of nonfiction where the woman was talking about getting drug tested for employment. And we were having a debate. I teach AP language, so it's a lot of like rhetoric and debate. And so we were debating whether or not, people should be drug tested before a job. And I said something to the effect of like, "Well, what's the most abused drug in the country?" And they were like, pot or fentanyl or whatever. And I said, "No, it's alcohol." They don't even think of alcohol as a drug because it's legal, because it's everywhere, because we drink it socially, whatever, whatever. And it kind of pains me that so many people are struggling with stuff and nobody ever asks them, "Hey, have you ever thought about just taking this one thing out of your life to see what happens?" You know?
Yeah. I've had this conversation. In fact, I've had this conversation with midlife health coaches where they will address everything, the sleep, the diet, the
Yeah.
you name it. Like, we're getting granular on weird metabolic shit, right?
Right.
But we're
Right.
still drinking.
Well, and it's funny because one of the other motivators for me to want to quit was menopause too, because I wanted my menopause to be as not problematic as possible, right? And I remember reading this article. I think I read it. I think I shared it on a meeting of this woman that was having horrible menopause symptoms, just awful, and was seeing all these doctors and going all these places, and they were trying all this stuff on her for like a year. And her symptoms were so severe. And then she finally went to a doctor who was like, "What about trying to take out alcohol?" And, she was drinking heavily. I think she'd lost a child. It was something sad really sad that had happened. And I'm thinking to myself, no, but, and then of course, what happens when she quits drinking? And I'm not to suggest that, please, I'm on hormones. Okay. Like I'm not suggesting that, it's a magic thing that you just quit alcohol and menopause will be easy. But I do think it's a major component. And this woman stopped drinking, and a lot of her symptoms improved to the point when then the medicine that she was on was actually starting to work better because she was no longer, so many people on antidepressants, on all these other things, and they're not giving those medications a chance to really work because they're also drinking heavily. And I don't feel like doctors even ask that question anymore or enough, right?
Right, we don't. Nurses don't either. And
Yeah.
one more example of this exact thread of I'm in a, kind of a container of health coaches as a nurse coach, and one guy came onto the group talking about how in his fitness group, regardless of the fact that all of the women in midlife did 100% of the things he recommended to lose X amount of weight in something like 70 days or something, and he can prove they did all the things, right? The
Right.
exercises and
Right.
the macros and the diet, and he was like, "Why didn't they lose weight?" And I raised my hand and I said, "Did you ask any of them how much they're drinking?"
Yeah.
Because it is not a direct caloric exchange. Like a
Mhm.
glass of wine is 95 calories versus a handful of Cheetos. We're
Right.
talking about an entire cascade of events that happen
Yes.
when we
Yeah.
drink.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he looked at me like, huh? And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, this is the stuff people don't realize. Or if they do, they brush it over. We will do anything to be healthy and lose weight
Mhm.
except quit
Mhm.
drinking.
Yeah. It's wild. It's so wild, and the health benefits are so, every day I feel like there's another reason, to be glad that I don't put that stuff in my body anymore, truly. Like, really, truly. Not just because it was making my life hard to manage, but because now, the links to breast cancer and, all kinds of things. But, I didn't get there right away, obviously, right? Like the more time passes, it's kind of harder for me to remember how I felt before I quit. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to forget because, first of all, I think it will increase my empathy for other women. Like I want to be there for women that want to quit, right? But also, I kind of like, there's a little part of me that wants to remember how tough it was because that motivates me to stay on the path that I'm on.
Yeah. So going back to how you navigated it and the impact on your life, how did your drinking impact your teaching career? And back to your book, like how
Yeah.
you got there.
My sleep was so disordered that there were so many days, and I didn't drink at work. I didn't, I would often drink literally the minute I walked in the door from work. Like I would come in the door and walk right to the fridge, 20 steps. Um, I didn't drink at work. I didn't go to work drunk or anything like that. But towards the end, my sleep was so horrible. I would sleep an hour or two. I would wake up, like I said, covered in sweat. I'd be Googling, do I have a problem with alcohol? Sending myself NA emails in the middle of the night.
I
And
love that so much.
oh my God. I mean, that talk about type A, right? Um,
Teacher, and you're
teacher,
sending yourself an
right?
email about do not drink.
Do not drink, right? And then I'd go to work and I remember just feeling kind of gross. And the there's this one story I tell too that really kind of makes me sad. I remember I used to, when I was a teacher, I would joke, and I teach high school students, so I suppose this can be somewhat forgiven, but I really don't think it's appropriate that I did this. If kids were making me crazy, I would say to them, "Y'all are the reason I go home and drink wine. Y'all are the re," and I didn't even drink wine, I was a bourbon drinker, but I would make this joke because they would laugh, and I can be really funny with my kids, and my kids like and I joke around with them, and so it was my attempt at creating humor in a moment, right? That's fine to create humor in a moment, but I would make this joke like, "Oh, y'all are the reason I go home and drink wine. Y'all are the reason I go home and drink wine." And I remember one year for Christmas, this kid gave me 2 wine glasses and a gift card to a store we have around here in Texas. It's a liquor store, but it also sells like, cheese and, charcuterie stuff. It's like a fancy liquor store, I guess you could say. and he gave me 2 wine glasses and a gift card to this liquor store place. And I look back on that, and the reason he did is because I was always making that joke, and he even referenced it when he gave it to me. And I remember, like, laughing at the time, but now I look back and think, "God, that's kind of depressing," you know? And I used to make jokes on social media. I remember I'd be like, "Oh, grading papers while drinking bourbon. Who's the lucky student at the bottom of the stack?" You know, the implication being that I'd be more buzzed by the time I graded their paper. And, I was just always cutting up and making jokes about it. And now I see that all of that was just a defense mechanism, because on some level I knew I probably was drinking problematically. And so, I would show up to work feeling kind of tired, feeling kind of I used to tell myself I didn't need a lot of sleep. I used to be like, oh, I'm one of those people that can just make it on 4 hours. I used to say that all the time. And that's actually ridiculous because once I got sober, I was suddenly sleeping 7 to 8 hours,
Yeah, yeah.
you know? And I remember the colleague, the gentleman I mentioned who was in AA, I remember when he said to me, he said, your skin looks better when he knew that I'd, been sober for a couple of months. And it's true. I look back at not to just the vanity of it all, but like I look at pictures of myself from 6, 7 years ago, and I actually think I look better now, honestly. I'm older, clearly, but I think I look better now. It was doing a number on me physically. It was starting to catch up with me physically, you
Yeah.
know? And so that's kind of a long answer, but yeah, and really the biggest thing, Kate, I would say in terms of how has getting sober affected my teaching is that it's as in all other areas of my life, it has taught me to draw boundaries. I no longer set myself on fire to keep other people warm, and that includes at my job. And teaching is the kind of job where if you allow it, you can be destroyed by it because of the narrative that we're supposed to be there for the kids, where it's all about the kids, sacrifice yourself for the kids. I love my students, but I am not going to sacrifice my well-being for them. I'm not going to sacrifice my health for them. Um, I have to draw boundaries. That means I don't take work home with me anymore. That means I leave work at an appropriate time. That means that I say no, to certain asks. I don't say yes to every kid that asks me to sponsor a club. I'm not going to sponsor 20 million clubs. I'll sponsor one or two, but that's it, right? And so I've learned in my work life to draw boundaries. And that's been the biggest impact that sobriety has had on my teaching for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap with nursing there as well. Always feeling like you owe your patients and
Hmm.
mankind, the best version of you and all the things, and
Right.
to kind of be a martyr, and then
Yeah.
you realize that it's only literally setting yourself on fire.
Yeah.
I'm a person who 17 years into my nursing career had like an epic meltdown. So, and how
Hmm.
much do you think when it comes to teaching, because I know this was really a thing for me in nursing, was the institution was also very disheartening. Like that we were
Hmm.
underfunded, the hospitals
Mm.
didn't have enough staff, we didn't have enough supplies, that the politics were fucked up,
Oh,
that I
yeah. Oh my
couldn't
gosh.
provide the care that I wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
was that part of it for you?
Oh, yeah, and that's still part of it public education, especially in a state like Texas, that we're not funded. There's so many, parallels that I can draw to what you just said, Kate. I mean, the lack of funding, the overcrowded classrooms, there's not enough supplies, there's not, and then teachers are, at this cultural tension, that we're trying to indoctrinate. We're just,
Yeah.
every culture war thing going on, teachers get roped into it. I'm just trying to teach kids how to read and write. Um, and so absolutely. And so something I've learned also in sobriety, and this is hard for a person like me because I'm very type A. I'm an Enneagram 1, if that makes sense to anybody. I'm very much like, it's not right. It's not fair. Ever since I was a little girl, but that's not right. That's not fair. And then what can I do about it? I had to turn every injustice into an action item. And I've learned, and it's not I'm not like perfect at it. There's only so much that I can control. The locus of control is actually really small. And I've heard this phrase, bless and release, right? I have learned to bless and release. I am not going to solve the public school funding crisis in the state of Texas. I'm going to vote. I'm going to ask my friends to vote. I'll call my congressperson. There are things that I will do. I'm not saying I just give up, but I also know that there's a limit to what I as an individual can do. And I am not going to carry it all on my shoulders. I'm going to, this is what's happening now. I can't change it. So I am going to adjust and do my best within reason. And then I'll bless and release. And
Yeah.
again, it doesn't all happen overnight. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it. I don't do it all the time, but that's one of the things that I've learned is that I have a very small locus of control. And I think for a lot of people in recovery, that's another reason why we picked up or we drank is because we felt we had to, do it all and do everything. And we simply cannot, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, the next question I was gonna ask you as we're getting to the end here, I feel like we should kinda wrap up, even though I could talk to you forever.
I could talk
But
to you forever, Kate.
you already sort of answered it in just your boundaries, but, like, I'm really looking at this for professionals who feel like they're kinda suffocating between having to be public facing and always be, "I'm fine, everything is great," and take on the burden of the institution
Mm.
and, what kind of advice would you have?
Well, I think something, and I don't know that this would work for everyone, but something that I have kind of learned is that this idea of vocation, right? Of feeling like I'm drawn to teaching and I'm called to do it is true and is real. But I think that I'm also called to do other things. I'm called to lead my sober mom group on Thursday nights. I'm called to, be active in other things. Like there's been a shift in my mindset ever since I got sober where teaching is not my full identity anymore.
Yes.
And I'm allowing myself to be okay with that. I love my job. I'll do my best at my job. I care deeply about my students. I'm not going to let them down, but there's going to come a point where I am no longer going to, like I said, set myself on fire, keep other people warm. I have to find things outside of my job, outside of my work that are going to keep me fed, that are going to keep me, spiritually fed, right? And so, it sounds like I'm telling people, well, get a hobby outside of nursing or get a hobby outside of, it's not, I know it's not as simple as just like get a hobby, but it's for me, it was starting to like listen to that inner knowing of like, what else might you be called to do? Or where else can you, use your gifts? And it doesn't just have to be the place where you go every day to get paid, right? And I think that these caregiving professions, these public facing professions, like you've said, like things like nursing and teaching, there is, I'm sort of repeating myself, but there is such pressure on people who do these jobs to make it this sort of martyr, self-sacrifice. There's that's the narrative. I mean, when you think about shows like The Pit or, for people in healthcare or, movies like, any movie about teaching, right? Mr. Holland's Opus or whatever, like that you're just supposed to sacrifice your whole life for this profession. And I just don't think that's healthy for anybody anytime. And so I would say, listen to your knowing. Where else can you, devote yourself? Where else can you spend your time and your energy? And stop feeling the need to align your entire identity with your work. Your work
Yeah.
can still have value, your work can still be very important to you, but it doesn't have to be your entire identity because I think that's not healthy. At least it wasn't for me, I can say that.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's been helpful for me and feeling less burned out as a nurse is having other areas that I identify as my zone of genius and that my passion, whether it's coaching and sobriety or fashion or, you know, I don't even care what it is, just knowing that
Yeah.
I'm multi-layered and that there's multiple dimensions of me, again, which I would
Mhm.
never have realized had I not gotten sober. But
Yeah.
kind of along those lines. So I love that advice. That's great.
And it's funny because sometimes when we get sober, like I remember the first few nights I was sober, I was like coloring. I ordered these flare pens online and I was like coloring with flare pens because I didn't really know what to do with myself. I'm like,
Yeah.
who am I? What do I want? What do I want to do? Like, I'm like literally coloring in a notebook because I was feeling kind of lost. And I think at first that can be a little bit scary, but in sobriety, you can begin to ask yourself questions like, where do I want to spend my time? Where do I want to spend my energy? What am I curious about? Um, and, for me, that led to me finding things outside of just my teaching career. And even really just my writing career. I am a writer, I am a teacher. Those are two big things about me, but I have other things that I want to explore about myself. I know this sounds like such a cliche, but I've gotten really into yoga, right? Like I've gotten really into my yoga practice and it's really important to me. And got more involved in my church and like other things that I'm feeling called to be involved in. Um, and all of that is because sobriety has given me the clarity and really like the quiet, if that makes sense. Like my life isn't always quiet, but like my mind is more quiet, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I'm more freed up to be able to talk about or think about, how do I want to live my life?
Yeah, I love that. So, where can people find you if they want to connect? I mean, you are a celebrated author, you're a leader in the sober space, a celebrated teacher. I think you're such a great example for other women if they want to see, how
Oh,
to really do the thing.
you're so sweet. Well, the best place to find me on social media, I'm really only on Instagram at author Jen Mathieu. I'm and Threads, so I guess I'm in both of those places. At author Jen Mathieu, and my author website is jennifermathieu.com. And then I lead a group on Thursday nights with the Sober Mom Collective, which I absolutely love that group. Shout out to Sober Mom Collective. It's a wonderful place for moms who are sober curious or sober or just thinking about it or whatever, wherever you are on your journey, you're welcome if you identify as a mom. And yeah, so that's where people can find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I know there's so much more we can talk about. And maybe I'll have you back on again so we can finish our
Oh,
conversation.
anytime. You can
Yeah.
have me anytime, and I said this to you, Kate, when you asked me about this initially, like this is an authentic yes for me, right? And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the thing. Like that's the thing, right? In sobriety, before I got sober, I would just say yes to everything indiscriminately, but like something that's so wonderful about sobriety is I know when I really want to do something, and I really wanted to do your podcast because I just admire you so much and your voice, especially in my early days of getting sober. Your voice has just been so helpful to me. So thank you for all you do for women, for people looking to get sober. You are just amazing. Just love
Oh,
knowing
thank
you.
you. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for tuning in to Rewired Sober. You can find me on my Instagram at Rewired Sober, where there are links to catch up with me and all the things I'm working on in my coaching business, or the link tree to my business directly will be in the show notes. I so appreciate you joining me on this journey, and I welcome any feedback or any topics you want to hear about, things that you're struggling with or interested in. I love you all so very much, and I'm just so enjoying doing this with you.